Ambassador Trollimar sat back in his standard-issue council chamber recliner and sighed. It was going to be another of those days, he mused to himself. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to reflect on the state of the galactic community. There were the great powers in the galaxy, like his race, the Teshar, and he grudgingly admitted the Lapons, his people's rivals, and about 100 other races, all considered to be above the petty disputes of the lower powers. But in reality, they were all immensely paranoid and watched like hawks the machinations of the lower powers as they conspired and plotted to become the next great race. Then there were the middle power races, those with just advanced enough technology to give them an edge over the weaker races, but not advanced or strong enough to be one of the greats, which usually meant they would subjugate, extort, or intimidate the weaker races for resources, territory, or just because they hadn't had an ego boost in a while. Typically, he avoided these lowlives at all costs as they were little better than bottom feeders. He had a particular disdain for the Larkani, who were once again picking on the Kushan. Then there were the lower power races, the poor sods that had been found by the middle power scumbags before having a chance to develop, or just naturally developed slowly, or were naturally disinclined to violence. These were the ones that lived under the permanent fear of being the next one to be exploited. He opened his eyes as the Lacani ambassador began speaking his usual drivel about how the Kushan had failed to deliver the mandated tribute as per their last extortionately and laughably called peace treaty. The Larkani ambassador continued his waffle, how the Kushan had pledged to pay the Larkani every year for the losses they sustained in the last war, possibly one of the most ridiculous and one-sided wars in galactic history. The Larkani sent in 10 of their dreadnoughts against the entire Kushan fleet and wiped them out in a matter of hours. Larkani casualties amounted to 3 killed in total. Their speaker invited the Kushan ambassador to respond, and that is when Trollimar's heart truly sank. He liked the Kushan. They were decent, hard-working, and polite, and were never meant to be warriors, and their ambassador was broken after endless years of this torture. The Kushan ambassador gave a reasonable and quite justified plea for mercy and time to gather the required tribute. He went into detail how their economy was just starting to recover despite the massive fines and costs implemented on them by other races due to their war with the Larkani and how it had affected their trade. He pleaded that their agriculture and manufacturing capabilities had been devastated by the Larkani after the Kushan surrender was still being rebuilt. As Trollimar looked around, he could see the looks of sympathy on the faces of the lower races, and the look of glee on the middle-ranked ambassadors, and the complete ambivalence of the greater races. He actually considered standing up for the Kushan and for once appeasing his principles, but he knew that would drag the galaxy into a much greater war, as the Lafans would instantly side with the Larkani, and that would drag in other powers eager to settle a few scores, and before you know it, the galaxy would be ablaze. He found himself musing that that was perhaps exactly what the galaxy needed. Trollimar noticed the human ambassador furiously scribbling down something. He liked the humans, they were funny. They were eager, and they were just new enough to have not lost their sense of wonder at the majesty of the galaxy. They had joined the galaxy community a little over a year ago, and so far had enjoyed the period collectively known as the "what do they have that we want" period, where the other races learned about their holdings, culture, and economy before moving in to exploit, extort, or just flat out take from them whatever they wanted. Humans had for the most part a very strong manufacturing base and a huge population for such a young species, and although their technology was inferior to most races, they did seem to enjoy a much better than average intelligence and adaptability. This had been spotted almost instantly by many of the greedier races, and the first few trade agreements that the humans were offered were dismissed by the human ambassador without hesitation, which had only the negative effect of making those races salivate at the prospect of a quick, easy war and all those human riches. But humanity had not seen these warning signs, and instead in their naivety had continued on its self-destructive path. Ambassador Trollimar had even gone to the human ambassador and tried to explain how things worked. The human just looked at Trollimar resolutely and stated that humanity would never kneel before bullies. He had heard that the humans were trying to form alliances with other races. He smiled at the childish optimism. Alliances had been tried before, but sooner or later they failed, as most races would rather abandon their allies than lose out themselves. That is just the way things are, and have always been. The Kishan ambassador had finished his pleas and had slunk down defeated into his chair. The speaker did his usual platitudes about peace and justice, like he was reading a script without much enthusiasm, and then moved on to the next order of business. But Trollimar was distracted by the human ambassador as he hastily handed the paper he had been writing on to the Kishan ambassador. The Kishan ambassador read the paper, looked at the human ambassador, and then reread the paper. He did this several times, seemingly unable to comprehend what was written on the paper. The human ambassador smiled and added an announcement to the session's agenda. Trollimar's heart sank as the slow creeping realization of what that piece of paper might be. The human could not be that stupid. As the speaker finally got around to the amendments, the human and Kishan ambassadors both stood up together and publicly announced a treaty of alliance between their two races. Trollimar read over the agreement. Shocked, he read the title again: Mutual Defense Agreement. Trollimar sighed. That's one way to commit suicide, he thought to himself. Trollimar left the council chamber to the raucous laughter of the Lacani ambassador, who had not only found the new Kishan human treaty laughable, but had also beaten the other races to the punch in being the first to be able to have a reason to bring the humans under their sway. Over the next couple of days, Trollimar and several other ambassadors tried desperately to get the humans to renege on the alliance with the Kishan. The Kishan were doomed, but you need not be, was the argument. But the humans eagerly invited all races to join the alliance. There were no takers, and slowly the human ambassador seemed to lose his enthusiasm. Then the day finally came when the Lacani invasion fleet arrived in the Kishan system. No one actually expected the humans to turn up. The pitiful Kishan fleet, still being rebuilt, numbered only 30 ships, none capable of matching Lacani dreadnought in a straight fight. The Lacani admiral bragged and boasted across communication channels how the Kishan allies had abandoned them until suddenly a single human ship warped into the system, then another and another, until entire human 7th Fleet was in system in full strength, over 200 ships. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the human broadcast a demand for the Lacani surrender. Even the Kishan seemed dumbstruck, but then they rallied and joined their erstwhile allies. Plans were communicated, and after the battle the Kishan admitted that at the point they thought the humans were insane. The time ran out for the Lacani to surrender, who assumed battle formation and began to move forward into weapons range. The larger human and Kishan ships reversing to keep out of weapons range, whilst the smaller and more nimble craft surged forward to engage their dreadnoughts at close range. The galaxy believed the humans' bluff had been called, and they were sacrificing their smaller ships to save their capital ships. But the humans had studied the previous Kishan-Lacani battles and noticed something, and now they were going to exploit it. The human ships, although nimble and fast, were no match for the firepower of Lacani dreadnought, and several human ships exploded on their approach. But as soon as they were close enough, the dreadnought weapons became useless, and they did more harm to each other than to their enemies. The human ships pouring unwavering fire into the Lacani dreadnoughts, overwhelming them in sheer numbers. They would concentrate on their shield grids, and when they were down, the larger human Kishan ships stopped retreating and fired everything they had into the dreadnoughts. 8 Lacani dreadnoughts were destroyed and the remaining 2 captured. Lacani losses were over 90,000 killed, whilst human and Kishan losses were only 582 killed, and the loss of 24 human ships. The Lacani were immediately invaded by several of their competitors who sensed an opportunity. The loss of 10 dreadnoughts would do that, thought Trollimar as he rewatched the battle once again. Everyone wondered what the humans would take from the Kishan as payment. Even the Kishan must have been wondering that, but all the humans did was mourn their losses and replace their ships. The alliance between the Kishan and the humans was expanded to include a mutually beneficial trade agreement, science and medical collaboration, aid and assistance agreements, joint defense command. Both races prospered whilst everyone else looked on enviously. Then a chance accident in one of the Boldari agriculture worlds caused a famine. The Boldari, too proud to ask for aid, began buying foodstuffs en masse, which the other races were happy to hand over for the 500% markup on standard prices. The Human Kishan Alliance offered aid at no cost. They offered medical and technical assistance to help the Boldari back on their feet, but the Boldari, still proud to accept aid, turned their backs on the delegates. As the situation worsened to the Boldari, they became ever more desperate, paying even more exorbitant prices, finally crashed their economy trying to save their citizens. As starvation took hold and the deaths began to mount, the Boldari looked weak and the hawks began to circle. It was at this point that the first human Kishan respect fleets arrived, shipments of food, medicine and machinery, all delivered with volunteers ready to help. The Boldari ambassador, still proud but humbled, fought back tears as the delegates from the alliance announced the shipments weren't aid but gifts from the people of the alliance to the noble and proud Boldari people as a sign of respect. It was one of those crystallizing moments in history where you can feel the change happen. The Boldari ambassador signed the Boldari membership into what we now know as the Galactic Alliance. Within a month, the smiling human Kishan and Boldari delegates all shaking hands and looking happy and optimistic. Within a year, more than 40 races had joined the Galactic Alliance. These races thrived, and we could only sit back and watch with jealous eyes. They helped each other without question. They defended each other without thought of their own personal safety. They shared technology, resources, and territory, and they cooperated with each other on matters of diplomacy. Against this new force, the middle-ranked races became nervous. Picking on one of these races now was to take on them all. And due to their massive manpower and manufacturing capabilities, no one truly knew what taking them on would look like. And due to their new trade agreements, the middle-ranked powers began to see their economies not only shrunk, but they began suffering hardships which they had forced on others. To counter this, they began a systematic process of persecuting the lower races like never before, with the net result that the Galactic Alliance received even more members, deepening the problems for the middle-ranked powers. When threats of violence and intimidation no longer worked, they tried espionage and tried to undermine the Alliance. They tried to turn the races against each other by planting false information and carrying out attacks on the member of the Alliance and blaming it on another member of the Alliance. But throughout it all, humanity stood poised and ready. Calm and collected, they would investigate thoroughly any incident without bias. They would negotiate patiently with an even-handedness that the universe had never seen before. Their charity and compassion seemed endless. Then it happened. The Lafons, restless and seeing their vassals weaken, decided to hit the alliance at its heart and bring humanity to its knees and bring about the restoration to the ways things were. A warning was sent to all members of the alliance. Over 5,000 ships were in the Lafons armada as it entered the human home system, weapons ready, their commanders confident of victory. Many theologians to this day ponder what went through the same Lafons commanders' minds as their sensors detected over 400,000 highly advanced Alliance warships waiting in ambush. The battle was devastating for the Lafons. Not a single ship returned. Alliance technology had advanced at an exponential rate, its manufacturing capabilities easily dwarfing all other races. Captured enemy ships proved a wealth of technology which was expanded on and improved by the vast scientific complex that the Alliance now enjoyed. The great powers, all complacent in their own little games, suddenly realized they had been overtaken and that now there was a superpower on the scene. This slow and terrifying realization changed the galaxy forever.